Hello and welcome again to Tea, Tentacles, and Talk, cozy conversations about LGBTQ romance. I'm your host, Chloe Archer. I'm also a writer of sci-fi and paranormal rom-coms, sometimes with tentacles. I have a great episode for you today, so take a moment to make yourself a beverage, get cozy, and join us for a fun conversation. Today, my guest on the podcast is the always fabulous Meghan Maslow. Welcome, Meghan. Take a moment
Thank
to
you.
introduce yourself to us.
Thanks, Chloe. I'm so glad to be here today. I am Meghan Maslow, and I write mischief, magic, and murder, which basically means I love comedy and fantasy in my romances, and I also like to throw in a dead body or two. But I promise, swear, there's always a happily ever after for my couple. Yeah, right? It's not the couple who dies.
Well, thank you so much for joining the podcast. In all transparency, Meghan and I have known each other for a very long time.
Years.
But I'm so excited to have you join us here on the podcast to kind of share more with readers and fans. Because this is the Tea, Tentacles, and Talk podcast, I always bring a drink with me, a beverage, if you will. And today I am enjoying a very nice oolong tea.
Ooh, nice.
Did you bring a beverage with you?
I did, but it's nothing that interesting. I've already had pretty much my fill of coffee this morning. So I am now onto, it's basically water that's infused with mango. So it's part of
It's important.
Yeah. Well, it's part of my, I'm training right now for a 10K. And so I'm trying to do a certain amount of water a day to keep myself hydrated because, I need to keep up my water for a lot of these things. And, would you stop? My cats are going crazy right now.
They heard dead body earlier.
I know. They want to be on. And they're like scratching at my chair. They're grabbing my outfit. So anyway, I've been trying to drink. I have to get in like 100 ounces a day. So I literally brought one that's with this and one that's kind of a grape. So I get through.
That's cool. So are they like electrolyte infused or something?
One of them is, and one is just a simple like mango essence or whatever, so that it just has some flavoring because I don't do very well with plain water.
So when is the 10K, and is it local or are you going somewhere?
Well, so it's going to be in April, and it's going to be in Baltimore, downtown Baltimore, which is great because I'm going to go the night before. I'll get a hotel, and I always go explore Baltimore because, again, Charm City Chronicles takes place there.
Right.
I like to explore every time, and it's going to be really fun to see it as a runner too. And then there's a big party afterwards because it's Baltimore. Of course, you have a big party. And so I just kind of soak in the atmosphere. And there's always things to take pictures of. There's just, it's going to be a fun time. So I
feel like this could be a write-off.
Right?
That's right.
It's a research trip.
Purposes.
I just happen to do a run in the middle of it.
Right. My characters are often running from things.
Exactly. They are. They have to.
That is so great. That's exciting. So, what is Baltimore like in April? Because as somebody who lives in Minnesota, April is still a dodgy month for us.
It's only dodgy in the sense of rain. I mean, it could be a little cold, but I doubt it because honestly, by then the cherry blossoms are usually have passed. So we're usually full on spring in April.
Wow.
So it should be nice. Shouldn't be too. I mean, the thing is that DC and Baltimore gets concluded, but we're kind of a swamp. Like it may have been drained, but ultimately the weather is like swamp weather, and so any later than that, it starts to get really hot.
Yeah.
So it's about
been in Florida for a while, so I totally know
you understand swamp. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Conversely, Minnesota, I basically say doesn't really get spring. We get what I call second winter or like winter light, essentially.
No, you go straight to
summer. And that's it. You know?
Michigan is the same. It's like 1 week of spring maybe,
Yeah.
and then we're into summer.
It's season here. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not my favorite, but you know.
No, that's the one thing with this area is there's a real spring. When we first moved here, I was like, you have a spring.
All right.
I was like, there's tulips for weeks, because
Right.
you just didn't get that in Michigan. It was like winter,
Yeah.
summer,
Right.
not much in between. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you some questions about being a writer
Sure.
in this genre. And we'll talk a little bit also about your latest release and some other fun stuff. But why don't we start off by kind of telling us a little bit about what made you want to become a writer and why did you choose to write in romance?
So I started writing way before and I always liked romance. So I started with fantasy. Well, actually, no, that's not true. My mom started me with mystery when I was little. So I always really enjoyed mystery. But then when I was a teenager, early teens, tween, I picked up fantasy because it just resonated with me. Fantasy, love it. Yeah, right? And then when I was a teenager, this is totally true how I fell into romance at all. I went to New York City with my mom when I was 15.
Okay.
And I had a stack of fantasy books with me. And I forgot to pack them because at the time we had books, right? There was no Kindle. So I forgot to pack them. We were in a hurry and I just left them at home. And I was devastated because I always read wherever I went. And fortunately, we were staying in a hotel that had a bookshop. And Johanna Lindsay at the time was like one of the big names and all this. I had no idea of romance, but I walked into the bookstore and I kid you not, there was a spotlight and this book up on a pedestal. And it was Fabio's first cover that had been a Johanna Lindsay one, Hearts of Flame. I still have the book on my shelf back here. Wow. Like, I still have it. That's the original copy that I bought then. And it was like the lights were, I was like, oh, and I was like, I want that. My mom was like, what? And I was like, I want that book. And she was like, romance? And I was like, uh-huh. So she got it for me. And then I became a romance fan. So, but I actually started writing as a mystery writer.
Okay.
Because I like the puzzles. I like suspense. But I fell into writing because, oddly enough, 50 Shades of Grey. So
common story for a lot of people, yeah.
Well, what happened was when 50 Shades came out, I had read all of the academic critiques of it. And I had also started reading the critiques about how it wasn't BDSM. It was pretending to be BDSM, but it really wasn't. Didn't represent the community well. So I read the first book. And I thought, okay, so this seems, this is definitely not safe, sane, or consensual, which is what I've heard that, BDSM is. So I started reading a BDSM writer because I wanted to see who's supposed to be really, really good. And she was sort of one of the pinnacles of that. And she wrote an within her series called Rough Canvas. This is Joey W.
Yeah.
And so I read Rough Canvas. And to this day, it is still my very favorite book. I adore this book. It was just like, again, it was one of those moments. But then I started writing it. And I thought, well, let me go to GRL. That's where we met then.
Yeah.
And I was a reader at that time. I was still writing mystery, but over time, I just transitioned in and I heard it. I liked the community. I liked what I was writing. And I just happened to incorporate, mystery, suspense, fantasy into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting because, a lot of your books do actually incorporate threads from those genres, mystery and fantasy, as well as the romance. Yeah, I mean, I started out with fantasy. I discovered it in 4th grade because we had reading hour kind of thing. And I didn't like a lot of the kids' books. And my dad always let us pick whatever book we wanted.
Was it Wrinkle in Time?
No. This is crazy. It was Terry Brooks.
I love Terry Brooks. Oh yeah, I read that really early.
Yeah, and I mean, like, and it's like a like 700 or 800 page book, but the cover really got me. And I read the back, and I'm like, oh my god, this sounds amazing, right? And I bought it, and like, I was in fourth grade. My dad's like, "Are you sure you're gonna be able to read it?" And I'm like, "Trust me." And then I was like consuming these, huge fantasy novels on the regular. Yeah. But as I got older, I tended to gravitate to a lot more that had like romantic subplots, like Mercedes Lackey and like some of those kind of authors. And yeah. It eventually became a kind of natural progression, but that is so cool. Well, can you tell us a little bit about like your kind of genesis when it comes to writing? Do your book ideas sort of come from character first, or an idea
Yeah.
or plot or setting?
Most of the time, well, okay, so they're all character dependent. I always write according to my character. I'm a pantser anyway, but I have to know who my character is and what he or they want. I have to understand them before I really start to write, because that's the one part, and I have to get to know them. I can start writing when I don't know everything about them, but I have to know the main thread of like, who is this person? What
Right.
matters to them?
Mm-hmm.
And so I can have an idea, but if my characters will sometimes be like, I don't want to do that. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter how great my idea is, and I'm just like, no, I want you to do this. And they're like, no. So I have learned that it's best to have a character in mind first. But I
Yeah.
do get these ideas. I can't say I never have like a plot idea, but it's usually once I've at least given a vague thought to who my character is. Like sometimes I'll be like, it'd be fun to write a romance about X, but
Hey.
I have to have the right character for it. So like I have a file where I've written first chapters for books,
Oh, cool.
because I had this idea. I think I've got this character, but they're not speaking to me quite loud enough that it's going to become something I'm going to write yet.
Sure.
And
Sure.
so I kind of work at it from that angle. But I'm definitely character driven.
Okay, well, that begs the question, what qualities do you and your characters share? How much are you like any of them, or how different?
Most of my characters aren't, they're a lot more morally gray than I am. Not all. I've got a few that are, probably better people than I am. But most of them are at least a little bit more, morally gray. Some of them much more morally gray than I am. But all my characters tend to be stubborn, and I'm very stubborn when when I dig my heels in. I think the biggest way is one of the threads I finally, you have these epiphanies about yourself when you're writing sometimes. Well, one of my epiphanies was, it doesn't matter what story I write, I always write about misfits who find their fit, always.
Mm,
And that seems to be a thing for me. And I have a thing for underdogs,
yeah.
which is probably why there's this joke that I always collect introverts. Well, I think the reason is that at a conference, it's a lot harder for an introvert to put themselves out there than it is. I'm an
Mhm.
extrovert. So for me, it's like, I'm at a conference. And so and I see someone who seems uncomfortable or lonely or just, needing someone else. They just want to sit at a table. I can't help myself because,
Yeah.
I think that actually comes through with my characters. Like, I
Mm,
think that they all have a need. They're all, it's a certain kind of caretaking.
yeah.
Um, and I have that too. So that's the
Mm,
one element. If I really think about all my characters and myself, that I think we really do share. Other than stubbornness, we're all stubborn.
right. Well, so that kind of offers an interesting segue into kind of like, so we know the kinds of characters you like to write. Do you also like to read stories with those types of characters? What do you kind of gravitate to when you're reading in the genre?
Yeah, mostly. I still tend to read fantasy romance or
Mhm.
paranormal or urban fantasy romance. I need a
Mhm.
strong romance thread.
Yeah.
That's key for me with anything. So I like, for example, I can do a fantasy with romantic elements or urban fantasy with romantic elements, but I'll always enjoy it more if it's really truly a
Mhm.
romance with those elements.
Mm,
I don't do a ton of contemporary, although I think there's a lot of amazing contemporary writers out
sure.
there. And I certainly will do it sometimes, especially if I need a palate cleanser where I want to get away from my genre. I'll do it. But I like to read what I write, and it may not be exact. I can go a little darker than I write. I can go a little lighter than what I'm writing. Because mine's comic, there aren't a ton of comic fantasy writers. A lot of them are more serious, but I don't mind that. So I tend to, I like to read. And I think that, I think it's kind of in some ways natural for a lot of us to be that way because we write the books that we want to read. Right. So you're reading something in the genre and you're like, oh, I love this book, but I would love to see that I haven't seen. And that kind of, boom, suddenly you're off on your, okay, I'm going to write about this.
For sure. I think that's very common for a lot of readers. I think you always start off as an avid reader first before becoming a writer. I'm always skeptical of anyone who says they want to be a writer and they don't read. I'm like,
I am too, completely skeptical. I was like, but you don't read.
That's always kind of baffling to me.
Right.
I mean, I'd be intrigued to know if anybody has actually had success in that regard, but I feel like you kind of need to know your genre when you're writing something to have a chance at being successful. But I think that this kind of brings forth another interesting sort of question in the sense that we're talking about writing books that we want other people to read, and it's always so wonderful when what we write resonates with readers. So can you tell us maybe what is one of the most heartfelt or nicest things a reader has said to you about your work?
Yeah, so I've had a few different instances. I've had, even this last GRL, I had the sweetest reader. Okay, this was the sweetest thing ever. So she's looking at me across the room, and she's got a friend who's whispering in her ear, and the friend is dragging her toward me. And so she comes up to me and I said hello and everything. And she just hands me the card. She hands me a card and she scurries away. She runs away. No. Yes, but it was so sweet. And so I read the card, and it was this really nice thing about how, she appreciates that I do this and that it makes her day and, to keep going and anything like that. But my favorite one was from a neighbor who's passed now. I dedicated one of my books to him because he's just so great. He was sort of the neighbor. I don't know how to explain it. Everyone just loved Jim. Like he was so good. And he came up to me one day and he said, I'm mad at you. And I was like, what did I do, Jim? And he's like, I understand that you write things and you never told me that.
Oh my God.
You're actually a writer. And I was like, well, yes. I said, but it's he's like, well, what do you write exactly? And I said, well, it's gay fantasy romance. And he's like, well, give me the name. I'm going to get it. And I said, it's gay fantasy romance. And he's like, I have not lived to my 70 some years, young lady, to not have being able to read a gay romance. And I was like, okay. And I was like, I'll go get you a copy. And he's like, no, I'm going to buy it. He insisted because he's like, I don't support you. Right. And then he wrote me this fabulous review and he was just had such a way with words and it was so sweet, and it was so funny. Yeah. And it opens with something like, oh, precious kitty cat kisses. Like it was just such a lovely, charming, and he got sick right after that and passed very soon afterwards. But it was like, it has cemented that in me that this memory with him and just being so supportive, because those are the things that I talk to a lot of writers. There are writers who can't tell their spouse they're writing MM. There are people who can't tell, they can't tell their family. They can't tell their spouse's family. They can't tell their friends. They can't tell their coworkers. And I have zero of that in my life. Like I'm extremely lucky. Both sides of our family know, our neighborhood knows, our town knows. Like, there is nobody who doesn't know what I do, and so, but sometimes it's just those moments where someone just goes the extra mile to show you that, they want to do this for you. That means the most.
Oh, that's so wonderful. I mean, those things stick with you forever.
They do.
Yeah. Well, so Meghan, is this year 6 now that you've been writing or published?
God, I don't even know. I think
I was gonna say,
probably, yeah, I think
I
5 or 6.
you've been doing this for a little while.
I have,
So,
yeah.
for a newbie author like myself or potential aspiring authors in listening to this podcast, I'd really love to hear some of your thoughts on, at this stage in your career, what does success mean to you, and has that sort of changed over time?
That is a good question. I think it's an evolving concept for me. Like, I envy people who do their those boards, the dream board, and they've got
Oh,
like
yeah.
they've got the pool, and they've got the house, and they've got the whatever it is, right? I don't have I don't visualize things like that, I guess. It's just not the way that I think about it.
Yeah.
I have several different measures of success, I certainly want to pay my bills. That's an important measure of my success, that I can pay my bills. It was important to me that, like, I paid my son's tuition for school this last year.
Mm-hmm.
And that was important to be able to do things like that. But I'm not much for things. So it's really, it's stuff like, I'm boring. Like, I want to put to my retirement account. I want to make sure my kids have their college funds fully funded.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that if something happens to Mr. Maslow, that my family's okay. I don't have like the dream house, or any of that sort of thing. And anyway, I tend to be much more experiential. So like mine would be like a trip back to Valencia, that sort of thing. I'd like to explore Croatia. So in that way, I don't have those goals, but my definition of success, I think, does change a little, because I think early on, it was more like, I must succeed, I must succeed, I must succeed. And the idea was that I not only needed to make a living, but I needed to be sort of probably like acknowledged as like, top of the field kind of thing. And I think that comes, again, because I have an academic background, and so you're sort of taught to jump through these hoops, and that this means success. Now that you've done this one, you must do this one. And that's a really hard track to get off of. But what I realized is that it doesn't make me happy. Mm-hmm. Because comparison is a killer of joy, first of all. And I don't want to compare myself to anyone. And I also want to feel like, we can raise all ships, Mm-hmm. And so I don't want it to feel in any sort of competitive sense with somebody else. I like more of the collaborative, more of the, hey, good job, this happened for you. Is there something I can do to promote you, or to make you, to help you too? Like, so I think in some ways, before, it was a very narrowly focused, jump through this hoop, you're successful, until then now you got to jump through this hoop and you're successful. And it's connected with this amount of money and all that. And I think that's changed a lot.
Yeah. Ignore my dogs who are barking at something out the window here.
Well, I have a cat laying on my mouse at the moment, and he keeps knocking it.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit. I'd love to talk a bit about your latest release, which is the second book in your Baltimore series called Chance in Hell. Can you give us a little sort of synopsis of this?
Yeah, so Cat's Chance in Hell is it's the second story in the Charm City Chronicles. You don't technically have to read the first one, but I tend to write threads that follow through, so that you'll have a much better understanding of certain characters and the dynamics if you read in order, but you don't have to. And so this is about a character who is a Siamese cat shifter. He's got lots of attitude. He's very sassy. And he works for Baltimore's resident demon. And his boss's, boy toy or love interest is in trouble. There's been a contract put out in his life, and they think it's coming from a particular segment of Baltimore. And they send him in to figure it out. And he meets the leader of this particular area of Baltimore. The way that I've done Baltimore is I've divided it into areas that are controlled by different creatures. And so he ends up meeting this particular creature who is a Rakshasa. And things do not go smoothly. It is kind of an enemies to lovers at first. And they end up on this, their romance is definitely front and center of all this. But there's also trying to figure out this other thread of what's really going on in Baltimore right now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. So who was your favorite character to write in the book and why? I mean, I feel like I have a suspicion, but
well, it's always the character's head who I'm in at the time. So which I love. I mean, Carter's hard not to love because he's a cat. He's very contrary. He can be like, I love this and I hate this at the same time, and that's a fun character to write because he doesn't have to be consistent in everything. That to me, that's a fun, because most characters, like if a writer writes a character and they're this and they're that, you're like, well, wait a minute, that's not the way that people react. But when you have a cat, like cats have a lot of leeway because they are very contrary creatures. Pet me, bite,
right.
And so he can be a bit more of that. But honestly, in a lot of ways, my favorite character to write is Tommy, who is the demon. He has a southern lilt. He's basically a murder twink, and and he has this soft southern lilt to him. He doesn't ever have to really threaten in terms of like he doesn't bluster, he doesn't yell. Everything is so almost southern gentlemanly about him, but yet he's the most dangerous creature. So he's really fun to write.
Yeah.
I mean, they honestly, they all are. I mean, I have soft spots for them all in different ways.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So, kind of what were some of your goals or intentions in writing this particular book, and how well do you feel you achieved them?
I feel like, from the feedback, well, certainly from the feedback that I'm getting from readers, I achieved it. It's done great. I'm getting wonderful reviews. But from a personal perspective, as an author, there's always things you would change.
Yeah.
Always. You can't help it. You get to the end and the book is done and you put it out, and then in this case, Greg just finished recording it. So I listened to it last weekend and I was like, I gotta change that. And so it is what it is. So I think I met most of them. This one I wanted to, so I have a brand. And so, for example, you're never going to read a full-on rape scene on page for me. That's just not going to happen. I don't think I wouldn't call myself cozy. I'm not cozy. We have murders, we have other things, but I just, there's certain things you're not going to have. But hard backstories is another story. Things could have happened in a character's past that were pretty traumatic to them. In Baltimore, the big thing is nobody has an easy story. There's nobody really that had a blessed, easy, perfect life. It has a little bit of that dystopianness to it in the sense that it is not, I always say that Baltimore is many things, but forgiving isn't one of them. and so, I do tend to bring in those types of things. And I wanted to play with that a bit more this time. And I felt like I'm always trying to, I don't want to keep my brand like this narrow. I always want to have it be more like, keep it a little broad, but you don't want it to be out here where nobody knows what it is either, that they don't know what they're getting. And so I think I pushed it a little bit more with this book, which was one of my intentions. And I feel fairly satisfied with that.
That's great. So what do you think was maybe the hardest part of writing this particular book?
Honestly, it wasn't the writing itself. It's a work-life balance. I have family. There's just a lot going on. My dad had cancer this last year. I got COVID. Like it was just, and I still have lingering memory effects from it. So there's just, it was a hard year in general.
Right. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Let's hope 2023 is going to be amazing because I know, like everybody's just like, oh, 2022, let's put it in the rear view mirror.
Yeah, it was a terrible writing year for me. I mean, really, the book itself was, was pretty much a joy. I mean, it really was.
That's good. Yeah. I mean, sometimes that can be an outlet for sure.
Yeah.
So what is maybe a question you wish someone would ask you about this book that they haven't?
So the one thing I haven't seen,
Mm,
okay, and then I know it's not every romance writer does this. I know this comes out probably because I started in fantasy, which epic
mhm.
fantasy carries on a thread.
Yep.
You know, even with mysteries, when you have a character, there's certain things that develop about that character over a series. And I
Mhm,
can't seem to write freaking standalones to save my
mhm.
life.
Right.
So I just have to face, like, I have to face facts. I am a series writer. But what
Yeah.
that means is that you don't get everything in one book. Like, you get the happily ever after. I'll never ever short a reader on that. And I want the reader to feel like you feel confident that these guys are staying together,
Right.
that it's not, how
Right.
sometimes you'll get to the end of a romance and you're like, oh, they'll be broken up next week.
Right.
Right. I don't want to leave anyone with that feeling. And I also don't like to necessarily, I'm not a huge relationship angst person. So I don't want to do in book one, they're together. And then book two, they break up. And that's
Right.
just me personally.
Yeah.
My stuff is almost all external stuff that the characters have to, as a couple, figure out how to navigate, and it may put stress on their relationship. But the question that I would love someone to ask is, what are you, where are you taking these characters next? Because they're not all
Oh,
fully developed yet. There
yeah.
are things I held back. um
Nice.
and so that's always something I think about is, well, what does come next? How do I develop this
Yeah.
thread with this character? So I haven't ended because I wrote Tommy and Poe first, doesn't mean their thread is ended. It
Yeah.
just, they still have their own little stories and things they're dealing with.
Right.
It's only in, but it wasn't necessarily central to them getting a happily ever after.
Mm.
But I'll often find that readers will be like, but I just really wish I knew this. And you're like, but you will. Just not this book.
So, does that also mean we've got any secondary characters who might get books down the line?
Secondary characters are so annoying. They're so rude. They're just like, here I am. I'm on the page and I want my happily ever after too. So yeah, that happens every time. Because literally when I start out something, I don't know I'm writing a series. I didn't know for any of the books I've started with as book
Wow.
one that I was going to write a series.
Okay.
I didn't know with Starfig. I didn't know with the Verona series. I didn't know with Charm City. I thought they all might be one-offs.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I never start with the idea. I have somehow have this delusion that I can write a standalone. I can't.
Wow. Yeah. I don't know if I could write a standalone. I tend to
No.
be, well, you know what the problem is? I'm a series reader as
I am
well.
too. I am too.
Read standalones. You got to sell me real hard on a standalone. I want that kind of continued sort of, you know,
Yeah, I
gratification with the character or whatever.
completely
Um,
agree.
yeah, so I like to
Yeah.
see a longer kind of romance being developed and things like that. But yeah, so maybe can you give us any kind of sneak peek into what we can expect from you in 2023? Do you have any kind of forthcoming material or plans that you can share with us at this time?
Sure. So the first thing is Greg ended up finishing my audiobook for Cat's Chance in Hell very early. I'm so
Nice.
excited. Yeah. So I've already submitted it to ACX Audible. So the Audible gods have it right now. So hopefully within the next 2 weeks, it will be out.
That's awesome.
That's so exciting. I did not expect that at all. And then I was in the Your Book Boyfriend's Boyfriend. I was lucky enough
Yeah.
to be invited to participate, and I wrote a story for that. And so I've recovered it, much better cover, and put it back. It's coming back out on February 23rd, but it's coming out in ebook. It's coming out in paperback because I can't write a short story. Mine's definitely push the length to the maximum. It's a novella, full on novella, and I did an audiobook with it. And I'm for the
Oh, wow.
first time, it's going to release at the same time. So that's already done and uploaded as well, and they're all ready to go. So that's taken care of, which is great. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm looking forward to that. And then I'm launching into, at the moment, I'm trying to write back in the Verona world. I really want to, I was hoping to finish it last year. I just couldn't, just
Yeah.
realistically, just because of the way the year ran, I couldn't. So I still sort of feel like I owe readers that.
Right.
I'm trying to decide whether I can get back to Starfig this year or not. Starfig, when I'm not writing Twig's perspective, which this next book won't be, takes me a lot longer. It's a pretty massive world, and I have it's like with epic fantasy where you get all these rules and there are all these things you
Right.
have in your head all the time, and so it just takes me longer. And I
Yeah.
don't write short. I'm like you. I don't write a 60K book very often. Like
Yeah.
it's just not the way I'm built. But when you write 100K book or 120K book or whatever, you
Mhm.
know, you're doing an immense amount of world building within that.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so then you have to keep track of all those threads. And I love lots of threads. I mean,
Hmm.
so I'm not sure about Starfig yet. And
Yeah.
I also would like to get back to Charm City because I know I've already got the first chapter in my head. So I know
Ooh,
what
nice.
next. I know how it's opening. I know some of the things that are going to happen in it. So I'm chomping at the bit. I have a very flighty muse. I can't tell my muse like I'm going to write this, and then I'm going to write this, and then I'm going to write this, because my muse will be like, no, I want to write that one.
Right.
I wish I were much more able to say this is my order. I
Hmm.
don't. It's not. I won't get anywhere with it. So it's always kind of like, well, I think I would probably write this, it'll probably be this. But I do have an obligation coming up for a
Mm.
super project in the fall that I can't say anything more about that.
Ooh, very exciting. Very
That I
exciting.
will do. My muse will cooperate.
Right. Gosh darn it. Yeah. That's wonderful. So, with this new stuff coming out, and kind of doing a new cover for the novella, and I know you recently also recovered the Starfig books. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with cover design and what the process is like, and who you've been working with, and that whole part of the process of being an indie author?
Yeah. Well, I'll admit it. I'm spoiled. I really am. Honestly. No, seriously, because my cover designer is a good friend, and it's
Yeah.
Alex Corza. We met and we just kind of clicked, and then
Mhm.
now pretty much every Thursday we Skype together.
Oh, that's
and
so cool.
she works on my covers in front of me. Like she
Whoa.
pulls everything up in front of me, she starts working on it, and I can I'll sometimes like we'll chat about it, and then I'll do admin or something like that, and
Yeah.
while she's working, and then I'll just look over and she'll say, hey, do you like this, should we try this? So I have a very different experience than probably a lot of people
Right.
do.
Right.
But it means that over time she has figured out what I really like and what I don't, because as an
Mhm.
author, I always envy authors who are very visual with their covers and can see everything and know and be like, no, it won't, oh, we're going to put in, tentacles. And you're like, well, oh, I know exactly how those will look. I don't. I honestly, until I see it, like I can't envision it at all. And
Yeah.
so for me, like finding someone like Alex has been a godsend, because she
Mhm.
will like, let's put in, I don't know, sparkles or something. And I was like, sparkles, whatever, I love sparkles, but I'm just saying, like, no, this will be horrible. And she's like, let me show you. And she'll show me. And
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that looks really good.
Yeah.
So it's, I think because of that, she gets me and I get the way that she works.
Yeah.
And so we just, it's been a great experience, but I don't think that, I mean, the vast majority of people don't work with their cover artists that way.
No.
They
Yeah.
put in a form, they say what they want.
Mhm.
Some cover artists want to pick the person. They find it easier if, hey, here's some different people you pick. But a lot of cover artists are like, hey, if you can find the model, let me know, because it
Yeah.
saves time from looking.
Hmm.
Um, and then say, hey, how about this guy, and they start putting it together. And that was actually how Starfig, the original covers, worked for me.
Yeah.
um I found the person, I did the cover sheet and all of that. But what I found is it's really like, and I think those first covers, by the way, are fantastic. Like Lou Harper,
Hmm.
they're wonderful. but I also wanted, I wanted to work with someone. The problem was I could never, with like the with when that way I could never see it in my head. So when Lou would be like, "Hey, what do you want on this?" and I was like,
Right.
fantasy element, I don't know, castle in the background, maybe, I don't know. There was a sex club here, I think. Like, you know,
Right.
is there such thing as a fantasy sex club? Like, it wasn't, I probably drove her crazy, honestly.
Mm,
I don't know, I can't see it. Um, and when I started working with Alex, one of the first things Alex said to me is, "Are you? Who is your market? Because right now, you tend to do fantasy covers,
yeah.
fantasy romance covers." And so that was kind of a transition for me too. And that's why I recovered Starfig. Actually, I
Mm,
loved the original covers, but it was true that, and that I really needed to acknowledge that what a romance reader, even a fantasy romance reader, tends to be drawn
mm,
to is that romance element, right?
yeah.
They want.
Right.
So she's really worked with me on that, and I think my cover game is getting much more, again, to my brand.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think the reality is most authors have to recover every so many years
That's
anyway
right.
to remain relevant in the market, because
Yeah.
what is or is not kind of popular or expected among readers can change. And yeah,
Yes.
I, I don't have um any graphic design skills really, so I mostly am just like, I trust your expertise.
Well, you can't go wrong with Natasha. You can't. I mean,
Yeah,
she does wonderful covers. She knows the market.
yeah,
She's going to treat you right. Like there's no question.
yeah. And I think that for new and aspiring authors, it's definitely important to kind of research different cover artists, get a sense of their work and their portfolios and stuff like that. Especially if you're someone like myself who has no sense of like what will or won't work. And believe me,
Right.
Natasha
Yeah.
told me no. Like, I'm like, oh, this box is cute. No, no, like, and I'm like, okay, So I mean, I think that it's important to trust the professionals
It
in
is.
hiring
Yeah,
and
I mean, this their specialty, and it's one of the things I guess I would tell new writers is, if you can afford it, get the cover designer who's best for your area of MM, because
mm-hmm.
who you click with and you can really work
Yeah,
well with. That's important too, obviously,
for
but
sure.
because I've seen a few new authors who've released things and their covers are awful, and
Mm,
sometimes they've done them themselves, or maybe a friend did it, or they got a pre-made that wasn't great, and it drives readers away.
yeah,
And and it's sad, but people do judge a book by its cover. They do. And you can be like, but this is true to my character. That took me a while. I was like, but I want something true to my
right.
character. And to give Alex credit, Alex really does capture my characters. So again, I feel very spoiled, but never at the expense of the romance elements that
Mhm.
readers are going to catch readers' eyes. So if I were like, I want to add in this and this and this because it's part of my story, which is how I started out, she would tell me, no.
Yeah.
No, it's going to be over busy. It's not going, it's going to complicate things. You're going to confuse your reader. No.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, for aspiring writers or newbies who are listening, I know plenty of other self-publishing and indie author podcasts tend to emphasize this, but I'll just sort of reiterate that from my experience, areas where putting an investment in your book are your cover and an editor, right?
Agreed.
Are
Totally agree.
able to yeah, the whole process and ensuring longevity and relevance for your book. And so um
Well, it goes to your brand, and if you do not have your book well edited, it really reflects on the way that people feel about your work. They might be like, I loved this story, but it cheapens your brand, is the only way I can put it. Like there is something that to be said for when someone opens your book. I mean, you can't help. Someone's going to find an error because
Oh,
I
of
don't
course.
care how many eyes go over it. It
So
doesn't
true.
matter. You can have
Yeah,
all of
my
your
sister
articles
found
miss
one.
something, right? It's just, I mean, that's a fact of life. But having one or two errors in a book, 100K book, is not unreasonable.
No.
But having an error on just about every page or
Yeah.
every couple pages, I mean, there was a few writers that I quit. I
Yeah.
just couldn't take it. It started to really ruin the enjoyment of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
at the point, and I'm not someone who nitpicks. I don't go looking like line. There are definitely people like, I don't know how editors read for pleasure. You just
Right.
be so tempted to be like, oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do that. But if it starts to catch my attention and I'm like, okay, you already had that paragraph a page ago, things like
Mm-hmm.
that drive me crazy.
Right.
Because that should have been, those kinds of things should have been pretty easy to catch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. Okay, well, let's shift gears as we're kind of winding down here.
Sure.
We're gonna ask a bunch of fun questions here.
I'm the worst at fun questions, by the way.
Um, well, I like to ask my guests because obviously I write quite a bit of sci-fi. Star Trek or Star Wars? Where do you fall in the
I love
divide?
them. Well, okay, I love the original three from Star Wars, but no, I'm Star Trek all the way, and I am the original series, and I am the next generation. Like I own them all. I watch them on a regular basis. Like the thing for me is that Star Wars is fun, right? It's pew 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 pew, and it's got some really great elements to it. The first
Yeah.
three,
Yeah.
and but Star Trek is aspirational. It
Mm,
really goes that extra step, and it asks questions about what it means to be human.
yes.
And for me, that gets me.
Mm.
And sometimes they fall short.
Oh,
But
sure.
the point is again, it's aspirational. It's what's possible for humankind. And I feel like, particularly today, that's such an important question for us to be
Mhm.
asking ourselves.
Yeah.
And which is why I shouldn't probably say this, but I'm going to. I didn't like the remakes.
Oh, sure.
I liked I liked all the actors. Nothing, no. Hello, nothing on them. He's trying to like inch his way in here, but they changed it to a pew 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 movie. It became much more of the Star Wars model, and part of that was the director because he's a huge Star Wars fan.
Right.
But to me, it took away all of those questions about the aspirational aspects of it and what it means to be. It's very anthropological. So
Yeah. Yeah, I mean I grew up with a dad who, watched the original series, and so I would watch those with him, and then Star
yeah,
Trek
same.
Generation
My
came out.
mom.
And yeah, I always appreciated, especially as somebody who was a humanities scholar, the philosophy, excuse me, philosophizing that I think Star Trek does as well, and like the ways in which like figures like Captain Picard regularly bring in like Shakespeare and like things from when they're supposed to be in the 23rd 24th century, are like incredibly old, and yet they still hold value in thinking about what it means to be human, and moral and ethical dilemmas and stuff that we face with the advent of technology and
Well,
knowledge.
Data, right? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
what a great character.
Totally, yeah, and of course, as a reader and someone who aspired to be a writer from a really young age, because I thought it would be so cool. The holodeck was like the idea of immersing
Oh
yourself
my gosh, right?
in any story you wanted was like so like attractive to me. So yeah,
Yes.
that's awesome. Okay, well, can you tell me one thing hardly anyone knows about you?
Okay, so you think that being an author, this would be easy for me.
Mm.
I'm really bad at fangirling. Another
Oh,
author. I'm really, really bad. Like, you know, when people have these epic awkward moments.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't. So if I know I'm going to a conference and let's say I know you're going to be there and I'm a fan of yours, I'm okay because I know I'm going to see you. I expect it. Not an issue. I'll meet you, but I probably won't be able to tell you how much I enjoy your work. Like I'll try to get it out, but I won't, or I'll be like,
right.
It was a good series. Like, I'm not very good at I don't know what it is. Or like, oh my I can do it on Facebook, no issue at all. Like I can call out, give shout outs, but in person, I'm the worst. I'm like, I read your series. Anyway, like,
oh my goodness.
And I have a particularly horrible fangirling. The most epic awkward one of all was, so I was meeting a friend for at a little Indian place, dinner, and I look over and I'm like, oh my gosh. And I lean over to my friend and I was like, is that Neil Gaiman? Next table?
Oh my God.
Yes. And she's like, no, my friend goes, who? And I was like,
no.
Yes. And I was like, are you serious right now? and I was like, oh my God, do you have a teenager in the house? Like, what do you mean you don't know Neil Gaiman? Wow. And I'm trying to be like, so it's not super obvious when I'm like this. I'm like, is that Neil Gaiman? And she's like, who? And so 1 second.
Yeah, no problem.
And so I was like, so I had to get out, Google him. I put it up to her and I'm like, hold it. I was like, is that him? And she's like, yeah, that's him. And I was like, okay. So I turned my back on him because I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I'm just okay. He's eating. Like he's with his
I was going
wife
to say,
and friends. Like, I think about that. Like, who wants to be bothered when they're having a meal and it's not at a conference? Like, conference is totally different situation. Right. But when you're just out about the town with your spouse and some friends. Right. So I was like, okay, heart's beating like, it's like you can't bother him. You just can't do this. So we go on with our meal and I'm trying not to stare at him. So I literally am having to because how can you not steal it? How can you not stare at Neil Gaiman, right? But, right. So I'm like turning away from him and we finish. Well, we get our bill, we pay. They stand up at exactly the same time we do. We all start heading to the door together. And I'm like, okay, should I say something? Should I say something? I was like, and I literally just looked at him. I was like, hi, can we take a picture with you? And he's like, he's so nice. He's like, oh, sure. And I was like, I don't know what to say. So I point to my friend. I was like, her son loves you. I can't even tell him I like him. I was like, her son loves you. And so she gets a picture with so he can send to her son, right? And so I take one of them. I'm not even going to get in the picture. Because I take one of her and him so we can literally send it to her kid. And so he looked at me afterwards. He kind of like does this little, and he goes like, would you like a picture with me too? And I was like, yes.
Oh my gosh.
So I go over to him. And I'm like, okay, so if he's like, let me see if I can do this on the here. If he's like here, I'm like over here.
No.
And he's like, would you like to get closer? I was like, sure. And so the picture, he's trying to be so nice. He leans over. He's like this, leaning over. I mean, and I'm standing there like I don't know what to do. And he leans like this to try to wrap me up, and and it's the funniest picture ever because I know that because the context, and I look like I don't want him to touch me or something.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, so total fangirl fail.
Yeah. I did not know this about you. This is wonderful. I'm learning all kinds of new things. Well, now I have to ask now, if you could choose 3 authors to invite for a dinner party, who would they be and why? And would you be able to talk to them?
I'm definitely inviting Neil. I've got to make that up. So he's on the list regardless of whoever else. Right. Okay, this question sucks, and I'll tell you why. Okay. So my first stuff is like, oh my gosh, there's so many. I would do Jane Austen. And I was like, well, wait, I don't think my dinner party would impress her. She'd probably have a lot of mean things to say about it. I'm like, I'm not going to invite her. And I was like, well, I love Edgar Allan Poe. I was like, God, but he drank all my booze. Like, do I really want him there? So I start like thinking. So I know I'd want Neil Gaiman there because I have to make that up at some point. Someday I'm taking him to dinner. From there, I don't know. I think Mark Twain would be fun, honestly. He's supposed, his sense of humor is supposed to be such a great orator. Like, I think he would be great. I would love someone like Nora Roberts, who actually doesn't live all that far from me.
Oh, wow.
Just because she's supposed to be, kind of definitely more on the introvert side, but I think she'd be fun just because she has such knowledge of the discipline. And I mean, she's Nora, right? She's just, so I think she would be a blast. But I think Shakespeare would be too, although I suspect that nobody else would get a word in.
Right. I mean, it is a tough question.
It is a tough question. And then you think, well, what if they didn't get along? Like, I'd love Terry Pratchett to be there because I want to talk about Good Omens with him and, Neil. I was like, well, then would Nora be interested in that? Would she like them? Like,
right. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, we're getting close to the end here. So, I think it's always appropriate to ask, especially for somebody who writes romance, do you believe in love at first sight?
Oh, yeah. I've met couples who definitely were love at first sight. I mean, I don't think that that's a typical response. I think most of us, I think for most of us, even if it's love at first sight, being with somebody over time, you have to put the work in. It doesn't just there isn't the magical, and now we're going to get along forever.
Right.
But I do think that you can definitely, that there are people who see each other and that connection is there for sure. And so then it's just a matter of nurturing it. Right.
But it is definitely a fantasy I think many of us like to read about.
Well, and we want it to be, we want to put our characters through a certain amount, we want to read, but we really do want that big, glorious, happily ever after, we want to just boom.
Yes, it is a wonderful thing. Meghan, thanks so much for taking time to talk with me today. Readers can pick up your latest book, Cat's Chance in Hell, on Amazon and KU. Is that correct?
Yes, it's in KU and hopefully within the next 2 weeks on Audible.
Audio book too, with Greg Boudreau. That's wonderful. And where can readers go to find out more about you, your website or social media?
So the two best places to catch me, one would be my website, which is www.meghanmaslow.com. And the other is on Facebook. I'm old. I like Facebook. So I have a group, Maslow's Mischief, Magic, and Murder. And that's where, I chat with people and I kind of tell them, hey, here's what I'm doing. It's the easiest place probably to catch me.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I will put those links in the show notes. Well, thank you so much. And we look forward to
thank you for having me.
Yes. All that you've got coming out in 2023.
Thank you. And congratulations on all your success as a new author this year.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.